This will be the concluding question. We received word over the weekend that in the lead up to the G20 summit, which will be convened later this year, and which Russia is presently chairing, this will be occurring in St. Petersburg on September 8th and 9th. Dmitry Rogozin, who is on record previously for having called for what he called the strategic defense of Earth, suggested to President Putin in a letter that the headline of this G20 summit be international cooperation for asteroid defense. In the letter, he said that the scale of neutralizing asteroid threats goes far beyond the resources of any country in isolation. You need the combined intellectual resources and scientific potential of the United States, Russia, and other countries in the world. This program of cooperation would increase the trust between nations and at the same time create the conditions for ending the current confrontation over the missile defense program in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. He's calling this new structure a space IAEA. Now, again, this week at a press conference that Dmitry Rogozin did at the London Russian embassy, the Russian embassy in London, he again issued his call for this international system of defense against asteroids, again in the context of outflanking the confrontation now mounting over the missile defense system. So with that background, we have a question that came in from Ben Deniston of the LaRouche PAC research team, who is currently attending the 2013 International Planetary Defense Conference, which is still ongoing in Flagstaff, Arizona. This is an international conference. It's bringing together experts on the subject of planetary defense from NASA, from the ESA, from Roscosmos, from the United Nations, and from Lawrence Livermore in Los Alamos. And you've got representatives from universities and the space industry from around the world. What Ben says about the conference is that there are many very important and exciting aspects of the challenge of planetary defense that are being discussed and addressed by the various speakers. And it's clear that there are options to improve mankind's ability to protect and defend the Earth if we pursue the appropriate programs. However, two issues of concern stand out. What Ben says is that while there is some limited increase in the funding from various governments for these planetary defense programs, the overall cuts to NASA under Obama's budget are brutal, and they're shutting down or threatening vital programs. This comes on top of decades of stagnation and a lack of mission that's been provided for the nation. And the idea that we can support one aspect of NASA by taking money away from another aspect of NASA is insane. Second, Ben says, the second concern is what is the effect of lacking a truthful vision of mankind, mankind's expansion of its abilities throughout the inner solar system? He says single missions are one thing, but developing a permanent infrastructure to provide mankind quick and efficient access throughout the entire inner solar system space is the critical step towards ensuring mankind's safe and progressing existence in the solar system. He said, whereas in the past you had visionaries such as Kraft Erica and others who provided scientific, rigorous, philosophical, and cultural visions for what mankind's imperative is, that space is not an option. He said the problem is today in the space community, visions are blinded by the dark veil of practicality. So my question is, this is Ben's question, given this, what is the best way to activate a younger generation, a generation who never lived under the leadership of Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy? How can we ensure the lack of vision which has come to dominate this present generation, does not permanently infect our youth and the generation soon to follow?
Yes, that's a very specific question, and it has a very specific answer. Uh, the problem is that most people have not seen the answer because they have not looked at the factors which have to be shown to some stubborn heads which refuse to realize the nature of the situation on other grounds. The point is that what happened, it starts with the death of Franklin Roosevelt. And if you observe that the death of Franklin Roosevelt resulted in an immediate, sweeping transformation of the policy of the United States. And if you look at that nature of that transformation, you find that the entirety of the crisis, the international crisis, which the world suffered from the moment of the death of Franklin Roosevelt, not before, from the moment of the death of Franklin Roosevelt. Now, the fact of the matter is that the Franklin Roosevelt death was kind of a planned operation. At that point already, before the invasion of done from the into Europe, from Britain in particular, before that there was one policy, but then the British intervened to postpone the invasion of Europe to free Europe from the Nazis' problem. This was done. It was done on the basis of Franklin's age and his medical history. So by postponing that struggle, which is probably about 1 year earlier, or 3 months, three quarters of a year earlier, or something like that, we should have completed the invasion of the overthrow of Hitler. But the British institutions, including the big man, all acted to prevent the liberation of Europe in an untimely fashion. That is, untimely while Roosevelt was still alive to make the decisions. Now then, look at the decisions that Roosevelt had made for the closing of the war. All of these were torn up by not only the British, but by the new president. And the new president was a real stinker, a real, Wall Street bum. So we went through that for a whole period. And what was done under Truman was the process of moral destruction wreaked against our own people, including people who had come back from military service abroad during that period. Then we had an escape from that. We had a grouping of a number of leaders, such as the President of France, the famous President of France, and other people were moving together with whom? With our new president. Our new president, John F. Kennedy. And things were going fine. And then John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And not being satisfied with that, then his brother was assassinated too, by mysteriously assassinated. And from that point on, from the point of the death of John F. Kennedy on, what you had is a moral degeneration in the young people of the United States. It showed itself in the middle of the 1960s, accelerated to become a disease of first magnitude by the beginning of the 1920s, 1970s. And that is what has happened. So now, therefore, we come to a certain point where the intention, the moral intention, the concerns that motivated the people who were going to do the great work of exploration of space is gone. It was gone with Franklin Roosevelt's death. It was gone afterward. John F. Kennedy restored that along with other leading people. But by the end of the war in Indochina, it was no longer there. The young generation was corrupt, and the specific kind of corruption of those who had reached, post-childhood intelligence and activities as such. We have been going downhill The green policy, which was started with the getting rid of John F. Kennedy, is now ruined. So now we have a population, which is now an adult population, or should we say an adulterated population, which is opposed to these kinds of things. Why? Because they're depraved. They're not the deprived degeneration, but the depraved degeneration. And that's what's happened. Now, the point is, we are faced with the greatest crisis that mankind has faced in historic times. The threat of an extinction, even an extinction of the human species, is possible on the frontier right now. And therefore, that's the problem. And we have to recognize that that is the problem. Probably the best way to get at it is to go at this question of the economic crisis. The very lives of our people in the United States, as in Europe, are on the verge of extinctions. So that's the way you have to look at it. We have to not say, well, what's this mystery, what's the opposition? But the opposition has been known for a long time. The opposition was the enemy of what the United States represents. The enemy is the British Empire. And it's the British Empire that has to take the defeat in this case. It's the Queen of England who has proposed and demanded a reduction of the human population from 7 billion people to about 1. What's that? She has demanded a reduction of the human population of the planet from 7 billion people to about 1. She is pushing that policy. She and her stooge, our president, current president, have pushed for that policy of genocide. We've killed the food supply of our own people in the United States. It was not something that happened to us. It was something that was done deliberately. And these are the problems we face. And if we don't understand and awaken to the fact that we have an enemy internally in our midst, an enemy which is typified by bankers of the type we know what they are, bankers who engage in the kind of things that are being done to us now, the destruction of our economy. And that's the problem. If we try to fix the problems one at a time and try to go around and give lessons to people on more morality on dealing with threats from outer space, that's not going to work. You're going to have to go at the real source of the threat. Who are the people who have created the threat? Who have created the perspective of accepting this kind of policy? How can you eliminate the disease without removing the disease? And the disease in this case is the intellectual effect, which has started in our particular case, in my experience, with the death of Franklin Roosevelt. When the postponement of the success of the invasion in Europe to get rid of the Nazi system, when that was postponed to await the aftermath of the death of Franklin Roosevelt, that's when the trouble started. You've got to go back to that root and see where the trouble came and who did it. Then we may have the ability to foresee the problem that we have to address.
Well, that brings a conclusion to our webcast for today. Thank you very much, Lynn, for joining us from Europe. And we look forward to having this occasion again next Friday. Thank you, Leandra, for joining me here in the studio. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you.